we've talked about this before on VGS and on Dialogue Wheel. It is very hard to make a game about incredibly sensitive topics. It's even more difficult to make games about moments in history that are less than 100 years in the past. It's still pretty fresh. You know, there's still a lot of people that have lived through it. Saving Private Ryan, there's tons of films and books that have dealt with these issues. Video games don't have a very good track record when it comes to depicting some of the worst conflicts that humanity has ever gone through. This week on VGS, again, we're discussing Call of Duty World War II. I'm Andy Burkowski, joined this week by Anton Mack and Mr. Zachary Fanny. And this is the thesis that we've decided to spend our time on. Call of Duty World War II should contain swastikas in multiplayer play. That's right, folks. We're saying should, a yes to the swastika. Please don't intercut that and make me look terrible.
Already did.
So let's take a look, because a lot of people got to be lost here. Like, what exactly are they talking about? Apparently, after E3, speaking to Eurogamer, Sledgehammer Games co-founder Michael Condrey said it may be one of the topics we wrestled with the most. In the campaign, we need the balance of authenticity with respect for the fact 100 million people died in the darkest days of humanity. So you will see the swastika in the campaign, using our military historian to make sure it's authentic, tasteful, and respectful. Which is kind of, you're not talking about a nice risotto here.
Yeah, it's not a cocktail party.
Yeah,
the fire engine's very tasteful.
Yeah, it's not tasteful.
Straight lines are so
it's horrid.
appealing.
It's meant to be oppressive and nasty.
And imposing and like denoting all the terrible things that it denotes.
You don't want a tasteful swastika.
Yeah.
I think we all agree on that. Yeah. So a little bit of a misstep, but again, if I was in his place, it'd be hard to pick the right words, because this is such a difficult thing to talk about.
Yeah, and I understand, like, taking in good faith, we understand that the gist of it is that they're respecting the history and power of all this.
But here's where it goes a different way. In our global community of multiplayer and zombie players, which is kind of funny, we've chosen deliberately not to include that. We want the community to play together. We want to be respectful of local customs and laws around the world. And frankly, it's a dark symbol, taking a brave step there, with a lot of emotion behind it. We don't feel it matches our multiplayer experience. Jumping in for
good segment, guys. Yeah,
jumping the shark a little bit. It is that so that we know that the swastika is not going to be in multiplayer for one of the most recognizable games in the gaming industry. People know games by Call of Duty, so it has kind of an obligation. There's an important part there that he mentions, laws around the world. It turns out this localization of different games in different areas has happened with a lot of divisive games before, right, Anton? Like there's a long list of games that had to go through a bit of an edit, even a chop, depending on the country they were in.
Well, let's look at Wolfenstein. That came out in, I think, 2009.
Yeah.
So, long story short, you fight Nazis in the game as the big, strong American guy. But it turns out in the German localization, they struck every single swastika out of the game.
There is quite a lot of swastikas because it's part of the history. It's part of this new alternative history.
Yeah. They have this strict policy specifically in Germany against blood and gore, profanity, and symbols associated with racial hatred, such as the Nazi symbol, right? So that's what happened with Wolfenstein. Even Team Fortress, for example, Team Fortress 2.
That fun cartoony game?
Yeah, there's no blood.
There's Nazi symbol, there's swastikas in that?
No, but there's no blood or detached body parts in the full game in Germany specifically because they just don't like that shit for some reason.
They'd have a hard time playing a lot of games.
It's odd. Austria has like their Holocaust denying laws too, right?
Yeah,
like
a lot of European countries just think like, we went through this really, so maybe your silly games shouldn't mess us up again.
Sorry, David Irving.
Yeah.
Right to jail.
How do you play The Witcher in Germany, though? There's a lot of blood in The Witcher.
A lot of swastikas in that game.
All right, so more laws around the world. More wacky laws from different places that games had to make changes.
China was kind of weird.
China.
There's censorship rules that forbid content that, and I quote, that endangers unity, sovereignty, and territorial integrity of the state or the social moralities of or find national cultural traditions.
So that's basically their anything we want kind of contingency. If it's bad for the Republic, if it's bad for this,
we'll
then
decide
we can.
when the time comes.
Well, it's funny because Hearts of Iron, you may not have heard of it, but it's a Swedish PC game that's based in World War II.
I'm all about that.
So they were the game was banned from all of China because of how historically accurate the maps were. So a lot of different countries and just places were considered independent states during the time of like
Tibet, which they never want to mention. Anyone that says Tibet is a place.
Interesting. That's their argument with it.
And if you say Taiwan is not part of China, you can't be in China.
Right to jail.
Well, they said Taiwan was also shown to be a territory of Japan during the time period of the game. So China was like, nope. Get that shit out of here. We don't want it. And funny thing, Football Manager.
What?
Yeah,
You're taking my FM?
I knew.
That's what all the kids
Saturday
are saying.
afternoons.
Yeah. Manage my teams?
Well, Tibet,
Do
Taiwan.
you need a video game for that? Don't people just get together and have like fantasy leagues?
We got a mutual friend, Greg. His first game that he worked on was Football Manager.
Really?
And internally, they thought they were going to get a 90% on GameSpot.
Shut up.
They got 41.
That's like not even half.
No, because they didn't know. It's hard. You're in that. They're managing football team. Go ahead. But that's not what this is about. Swastikas. Not Greg Burgoon.
Football Manager had Tibet, Taiwan, and China treated as separate teams, which mean they were all put on equal footing. And China was like, nope, none of that. We don't want it. And they just banned it totally from China, which... I guess.
I wonder if people were upset about that or didn't really care. So there's other examples, but I think it's important to go back to the one that we started with. The game developers, of course, have the right to decide what their game looks like and what they choose to talk about or choose not to talk about. They're making attempts to have some kind of historical, apparently tasteful accuracy when it comes to the campaign. In multiplayer, they're not trying to do that because it's a different sort of experience. Now, Zach, you find yourself on the other side of this thesis that we began with.
Yeah, I think I would agree with the whole thesis that we're presenting here if they were omitting swastikas from the campaign. But the multiplayer that they're establishing is clearly distinct from the campaign, not just in terms of omitting historical iconography, but in the format, right? You can play as multiple genders and races, and everything's a bit anachronistic, and they're focusing on the multiplayer experience versus historical verisimilitude. So there's no...
In other words, 360 no scopes.
360 no scope, yeah.
So it's so erratic and strange that they get.
So I think it's acceptable that they're building clearly something different, and even like if you're adding swastikas to multiplayer, like what is the value that you're really adding? Because the game itself, in multiplayer has the zombie mode, has a lot of anachronisms, so it's not helping further anything that's being done already. They're not taking a historically accurate multiplayer and then just omitting one part of it that's really offensive. Like the whole multiplayer is arranged differently, so I think this is perfectly acceptable.
Where do you find yourself on this, Anton?
I don't know. I
don't know. Let me explain.
I do believe that developers have the right to kind of withhold specific content from their games. It just makes sense. That's just kind of how it is. I just find it weird that it is multiplayer for some reason. Like what value, kind of like on the other end of it, what value do you give me by taking away a swastika?
What's the risk? I guess.
Well, because you're highlighting the fact that this is not like a historical accuracy is not the value that multiplayer is built around. It reinforces that. Like we're moving the swastika, we're letting you be different characters, and obviously you're gonna have different types of guns, and so it's very coherent with what they're building.
But you're not getting there's a line though, because they are making an experience that is different. They claim from the multiplayer, but I take umbrage with that because I don't think it's going to be that different. I just think they're not going to have the stuff that's offensive. They're like, it's going to have the same shooter mechanics. There's no way that they're building new shooter mechanics. They're just trying to take out the offensive stuff because they recognize how toxic and evil video gamers are.
They can do that responsibly. They're unburdening themselves with the historical ethics of the whole thing.
So
they're just saying we're not going to be like trying to represent anything like historically accurately. Like you're gonna keep the same mechanics because that's just how you make a game, right? And you want to feel like you're in a war, but the fact that it's World War II, I think, will not be as important in the multiplayer.
See, that for me, what you put there, I think, is exactly how they feel, and I think that's my biggest problem. Is that with this example, they're trying to unburden themselves.
So it's what they've outlined to you. What's the value of adding the swastika?
I'm explaining right now.
Oh, I can't wait.
Get ready for it. If you're talking about World War II in any way, if you're depicting these events, even if you're trying to do something that's slightly stylized or a bit of a simulation, I think that you owe it to the time period to include that iconography of evil. I think it is so important and vital, even unless you're getting so stylized that these are representations or avatars of the devil, then maybe. But I don't think you should make a game about World War II and say it's a World War II game and not include the side that committed most of the 100 million deaths.
But I think...
And if you are... hold up, because if you are doing this, then you recognize that your players can't have adult things, and they're bad boys. No, they can't. That's why they're not doing this, because they know they're going to be poisonous.
This is why your argument doesn't hold any water. I would agree with you.
Holds all the water in the world.
You're so dry. I'd agree with you if this was the same thing in the campaign as well, but it's clearly just a section of the game they're removing it from because the rules about that section are just a bit more anachronistic and ridiculous. So it makes sense. They are paying, well, at least they seem to be. We'll see when it comes out, but they seem to be paying historical respect and reverence to these hateful ideologies in the campaign. So I think you're kind of overstepping.
But why don't they do that? Go ahead. Sorry,
it weirds me out because now looking at zombies as
Anton's weirded out.
Well, as a zombie player, we all know it's Nazi zombies. And it's going to be
the brand. That's what it's been for 10 years.
And don't you want them to veer away from the historical realism when they're doing that, as opposed to like doubling down and be like, no, they should all have swastikas on their uniforms.
You can't have it both ways, though.
Yeah, my thing is you can't just call them Nazi zombies, but then not add the symbol itself, because I don't know. To me, it kind of takes away from the slight immersion that I get from killing a bunch of zombies that are Nazis. Like,
it's okay to kill Nazis.
So you want it in for immersion's sake.
Well, I'm just saying it's just kind of weird taking away a symbol when you have it in 1/3 of your
Do you
whole
want
game.
these 360 no-scoping Pepe guys?
Well, then you're saying you're proving the point, though, that they shouldn't have made this game. If you know that your consumers can't handle big boy things like the idea of swastikas without taking advantage of them.
Now we're in a separate argument.
No, but we're in it right now, and I think I understand what you're saying, that what does it actually lose? And I really do believe that you do lose some of the impact of this time period. I think you do owe it.
In the multiplayer?
It's if you're telling this experience, if you're trying to display and give reverence to this experience.
You're not, though. You're shooting zombies in multiplayer.
But you're doing it in World War II.
Yeah.
And you're killing Nazis.
Like, we're not talking about the campaign.
You're killing Nazis, though. That's who you're shooting.
Zombies.
No,
like,
you're shooting.
Ridiculous.
In multiplayer, you're still shooting other players who are Axis players.
Other
so
than zombie mode,
they are Nazis.
Yeah,
and the
Nazi
only
soldiers.
thing you're doing is stopping them from having a little patch or making the places look a little more barren. And I think that showed the reason they're doing that is because not because they're trying to be sensitive, because they know how despicable the people that play games are. And I just think they owe it to our shared history.
I think what they're doing speaks to your values, because they are saying we're going to relegate this iconography to the space where we're dealing with it and with all its historical contingencies and meanings and values and hatred.
You're making divisions there.
We're keeping the campaign where we can deal with it the way you describe and recognizing its power and place in history and place in people's lives.
The same team, though.
I know, but when we go to multiplayer where things become more, separated from reality, then we're going to remove it, because in multiplayer we're not concerned with historical accuracy and the weight of this historical time period. That's not our ultimate value multiplayer, right? We're using the same mechanics, and you're going to be feeling like you're in a kind of a world war, but we're not concerned
kind of a world war, but not World War II? You're fighting the Nazis.
Multiplayer. Yeah,
you're still fighting Nazis, though. They're just not called Nazis.
But the goal in multiplayer, part of the game is to play with other people and contest with them. And like historical accuracy isn't the primary value, and it doesn't have to be. And I think if you added Nazi symbols on like the zombie uniform and on the uniform of your opponents, I think that would be kind of weird.
Why would that be kind of weird if you're fighting Nazis in, like, it's going to be set up.
People are fighting as Nazis in the multiplayer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
And I think that's important to realize the teams you are on and the different people who are involved in this conflict. Because you're still doing that. Like, that's the thing you're missing. You're still playing as Axis powers. They're just calling it Axis powers. Right. So it's not as if I would agree with you. I would agree with you if their multiplayer was more stylized, off the wall. If they were just a Nazi mode, I would agree, or it's a Nazi mode, a zombie mode, I would agree with you 100%. But they are still trying to do a semi-realistic multiplayer. They're just taking out the things that they're going to get in trouble for. So if they were doing what you were actually claiming they were, I would be going hands on knees for this Sledgehammer man. But I really think you're still playing as allies, you're still playing as Axis, you're still in these front areas. They just took off the offensive stuff, and that's not enough.
In one section of the game, in a game that's not concerned with translating to you the historical authenticity.
Why do you think
and troubling nature of this period?
Before I get too run away with it,
like,
why do you think
doesn't do anything?
Why do you think they're not responsible to the historical accuracy in multiplayer? If they are still...
we can talk about like historical accuracy and responsibility in games, where I think they are, and I think the campaign hopefully will fulfill that responsibility. But in multiplayer, I think innately, and even with Battlefield, it feels kind of weird because you are doing ridiculous things that you wouldn't be able to do in real life.
There's still iron crosses in multiplayer Battlefield.
Right,
like,
and you're fighting zombies. Like it's very clearly you're in the game multiplayer, social, contesting element. Like you're in the game, part of the game, basically. Like it's very, very gamey. There's no narrative being told here. Whereas in the campaign, you're constructing a narrative for a player to experience and be immersed in. Multiplayer, they don't want you to immerse you in some kind of like historical narrative. They want to immerse you in combat with
in the world too, though.
So I think it's natural to say, like, listen, our multiplayer isn't.
You don't see it as a cop-out, really, when it's still the Nazis, but they're not called Nazis. When it's still the Allies, but they're just taking it out.
I get what you mean. I would see that if that was applied to the game as a whole, which is not. And I agree. Like, honestly, playing the game, you know, the stupid jokes and just the kind of troglodytes that are playing games in general are going to really abuse that.
Yeah. If we start playing this game, even when they take this out, I guarantee you're still going to hear, as Mr. Fanny said before we recorded, someone scream, Das Juden!
Yeah.
Like it's still going to happen.
Yeah.
Anton, like, I see where you're coming from. I don't necessarily agree with it, with respect and love, which is not normally where we find ourselves. But Anton, where do you see this whole mishmash of the yin and yang of Zach and Andy? Don't fight, Mom and Dad.
Please stop.
Come with me, son. You'll stay with me. Yeah.
Oh no.
After the Nazi.
After listening to both sides and just kind of like sitting on it for a bit while you two argued and bickered like children, got him.
We're not disagreeing.
Classic VGS.
I feel my point is my stance has kind of changed to you either have it all in or you just don't have it at all. At the end of the day, like, I don't like the fact that you have all this imagery in the single player, but in the multiplayer, you're just like, no, because it's a dark
good point.
symbol.
Because you will be playing one, and then everything's going to be very similar. It's just as if they cropped out the stuff.
I want to be clear as well that I don't think that there's some kind of like universal rule book that you can use of saying all multiplayer games dealing with history should remove hateful iconography.
That's true.
Like every context, I think is different, and I think that's like the kind of like trouble here. But I think in this context of what they said, like their multiplayer is you know, tangibly different from their campaign, and this is it's cohesive. It fits with the logic that they're pursuing with their multiplayer.
Let's
like you still haven't been clear with me about, you know, what the value is if you just add in more accurate iconography. And you're
I think the value
else.
is respectful to the history that you're speaking
though?
to. If it's respectful in
zombie
multiplayer,
soldiers.
If it's respectful in single player, I don't see the logical inconsistency for it to be respectful in multiplayer.
I think it'd be way less respectful.
Images on a screen,
the modes and everything are just so unconcerned with history.
But it's still, you're still fighting different forces. Like, they're not that unconcerned. So that's the one thing. I still think there is a place.
The actual nature of those forces don't matter. Like in campaign, you can really do some interesting things where you're exploring fighting Nazi soldiers. In multiplayer, it doesn't really matter what side you're on. Like in all multiplayer, in Battlefield 1, it doesn't matter. You have access to the same guns.
You don't think it matters what side you're on a little bit?
In multiplayer, no. It won't. It could if they did it that way.
In COD games, I think you feel the difference.
Yeah,
really?
to a certain extent, yeah.
But hold on. So I'm answering
player,
your question.
so,
I'm answering your question before of the advantages to it. One, we disagree on the minutia. That's fine. Different strokes, different folks. Zach's wrong. I really like what Anton said, though, of the inconsistency and the dissonance of playing the single player game with the same mechanics, with the same weaponry, with the same HUD, and now all of a sudden the accurate representations are taken out when you go into multiplayer. That dissonance, they're saying it themselves, will be there. And I think that will, for those Pepes out there that are really intense about gameplay integrity, would have something to even put their racist heads on.
Gameplay at all.
It does. You would notice it if all of a sudden everything around that was slightly offensive is gone.
It's not like
Oh, but it's still atmospheric. That's important.
No, but see, it's not so much a dissonance as just like a different mode. Like
come
Battlefield,
on.
Battlefield 1 like is the obvious parallel, but Battlefield 1 campaign, I was much more involved in than the multiplayer. Like it's clearly different modes and different aims.
Battlefield 1 did a better job with all this, though.
Oh, I totally agree.
Yeah.
And different functions. Like it's not a distance because you're differentiating based on mode. The aims are completely different.
Mr.
Your
Fanny,
aims in campaign
let me
are
ask
the
you
same
this.
as in multiplayer.
I want to pick that sweet ginger brain. Ooh, let's take our time with it. we find I think we're close here, but still miles apart when it comes to this. In terms of Sledgehammer making World War II Call of Duty, do you think it's a checkmark, thumbs up, or do you think they should have made a different game?
They should have made a different game.
Anton?
Yeah, different game, totally.
I cannot stress how, like, I think stupid of a decision this was by the powers that be, especially considering, like, they are the recognized video game of video games.
And it's not that they're making a World War II video game. It's that they're the ones making it.
Yes.
That's the issue.
Give it to, honestly, I would rather give it to the Battlefront guy that wrote, what's it called? The Line.
Yeah.
I would rather do something like that, because this is such a heady topic that is so difficult. It shouldn't be the most popular creators behind it. It's not, you can't make it like a Saving Private Ryan, and that's the interesting parallel. You can't make it like that because this is interactive, and it's something you do.
By definition, the most broad, palatable product for everyone to play, and it's dealing with one of the most heinous, periods of history. So it is there. That's where the dissonance is.
And Nazis will play your game, which is something you need to think about.
Yeah,
Nazis will be playing. There's still people, a lot of people,
white nationalists. I.e. Nazis will play. Yeah.
We'll be playing this game, and that's something that these people who made this game need to consider. So, I don't know. I think ultimately, it's good that we're having this discussion about the role of video games in depicting history, because I think that's very interesting. Like you said, Zach, it's not deplorable if a game chooses to talk about World War II and is not entirely historically accurate. Like, it's great that there's artistry about these times, because you can find truth.
And that's the risk artists do take, and I think that's admirable.
But I do think that these people with their pedigree should not be the ones that are controlling this cart off a wooden rope to death.
I'd agree with that.
And it's also, I want to talk a little bit, because just a moment before we settle up here, I blame us as well.
What?
I blame us for doing this. I think the gamers are the ones that caused this problem.
How so?
Because every single gamer in the world,
Anton
specifically Anton, got upset about Call of Duty. What's the last one?
That was Advanced Warfare? Infinite Warfare.
Call of Duty Jon Snow in space. Everyone got so upset and said they need to go back to their roots, and these game development firms are listening to the people, and now you force them to do something they don't want to do. It's 50 Shades of Grey all over again. Dakota is not ready to do these sex things, but you're forcing Sledgehammer to do it.
It's an interesting, this is a whole other discussion, but I think gaming might be too young as a medium to really fulfill the responsibilities it has to its subject matter in the same way that other art forms do.
No.
Yeah.
Honestly,
broadly, I think there's something to dive in there. But ultimately, I think it's important that we settle this up now, boys. Fanny, still, where do you find yourself in the topic about Swastikas multiplayer?
I agree. I like that we found this common ground.
Of disagreeing.
I'm very nervous about this company making this game, but I do think you're able to distinguish between different modes in your game, and I think the decision to remove Swastikas is cohesive with all the other decisions they've made to create their multiplayer.
They fucked up by making the game, but you either have all the symbol in the whole game or just not have it at all. Simple as that.
There we go. And I find myself on the side of you kind of owe it to what the subject matter is, or you get super stylized and then I don't even know what's happening. That's okay. Big thanks again to Mr. Fanny and Tom Mack. Keep following us next week to talk about this. Where do you find yourself on this debate? Do you even care? I think even if you don't play Call of Duty, this should matter a little bit, because we're going to have an issue like this about games you like at some point. Do you think Swastikas should be in the multiplayer of Call of Duty? Please tell us below, and I promise we'll read everyone and only cry a little bit when you insult us. Andrew Bukowski, Dialogue Wheel. That was great, guys.